that question, I want to just say thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tony from Carmi, who is going to share some information about our facilities with you tonight. I know you're all interested, and we know that you are our supporters, and this building and our facilities are yours. Carmi has been around for, what, 34 years? 35 years, and they've done a lot of work in K-12 buildings, some right down here in Southwest Michigan. So I know you'll be pretty interested in what they have to say. I want to thank Chris Carlson, who is kind of like our unofficial but official chairperson of our Facilities and Finance Committee, as well as Mark Curlin, who is our Director of Operations, for getting this going. I don't know if you guys want to have anything to say. Okay.
On paper and on print to where we are at with respect to our facilities. As right now, we're in the process of fixing things as they break, and I'd like to get to a preventative maintenance type program. And so I pushed hard for this a couple of years ago, and it's come to fruition. So I'd like to welcome Tony and his crew and let them get started.
Well, good evening. I want to make sure everybody can hear us okay. Can you hear okay? Well, thank you for inviting us into your home, and we've been doing these studies for a long period of time. It's a lot of information. We'll try to make it as enjoyable as possible. There's what we thought we'd do this evening, and before I get started, I want to introduce Nate Van Hoekum, and he's with Millie's Engineering, and he'll be helping me this evening with mechanical, electrical, plumbing type information. So tonight, our goal is to try to take you through life safety, accessibility, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. There's going to be some building envelope, and site kind of peppered in here, but we know that there's 2 sessions, and we may have some of that in more detail in our next session. See if I can make everything work here. I thought I'd start off with just a very simple graphic to show what we are actually studying, okay? Yes, yeah, thank you. That's always the magic, right, when you have somebody like Phil. And there are many other categories that you could pepper in here, but we always like to take a look at the immediate site of these facilities. If you're not familiar with building envelope, you can see up at the top right-hand side you've got the roof, which causes every district a lot of pain, right? I always say roofs and asphalt. Those are the 2 things that are so hard to keep under control. Along with that, the wall systems of a building, the doors, the windows, what I like to call the edge of the facility at the transition of the wall and the roof, the coping fascia soffit. And one thing we often forget is what I call transition sealants. So that's kind of what seals all those materials together. So that kind of takes you through the things that we study in envelope. Life safety, you can see in the lower left, we look at everything from emergency lighting, in case you would lose power throughout the facility, what that looks like. Oftentimes we look at the kitchen. With aged facilities, we're always concerned about is everything up to code within the kitchen. Stairways, always a part of the egress, so we're always looking at that. And means of egress is really just talking about all ways out of the building. Fire extinguishers, doors, you may wonder, well, why are doors there? But in many cases in a facility like this, we're looking for a fire rating on that door. Corridors, the same thing. In today's codes, we're looking at fire-rated conditions. And why is that in place? So that we can safely move students out of those classrooms into the corridors and out of the building. When we start looking at life safety, we look at what's called allowable areas. Each facility, according to building code, is allowed to have a certain amount of square footage. And then there's things that you can do to add to that allowable area, but we look at that as a part of this study. What'd I miss? I think we hit most of those. Accessibility, and I think I'll stop now and say that life safety and accessibility, it's a very interesting fact that we have to talk about with these two categories. These two, as you are living in these facilities today, many of these things are what we call grandfathered, right? They may not be to code, but they're grandfathered, and until you start making substantial changes to these facilities, would you be expected to bring this up to code? So accessibility things we look at, we got to get you in the building, okay? So we got to make sure parking, we have accessible parking, ramps are in place, what we call tactile detection. You might see these little bumps that transition us from concrete walks to asphalt. We certainly are looking at elevators, signage. Where do we need auto doors, or where should we have auto doors? Drinking fountains, sinks, restrooms, and doors themselves. And sometimes I want to point out now that you see that doors are in both of these categories. The beauty of that is that you're only going to pay for those once. You'll see it show up twice, but oftentimes we get the bonus of taking care of those at the same time. I'm going to have Nate take us through just the categories real quick and we'll get started.
Sure, thanks, Tony. So yeah, for MEP, we're really looking at your building systems, the ages of equipment, any deficiencies we observe, things that are noted by staff, and if there's performance issues. So that applies to mechanical, how's HVAC working, heating and cooling, ventilation, air quality, all of those things. And then along with that, plumbing, right, your piping systems, your water heaters, what are their ages, are they due for replacements, those types of things. Now electrically, we're looking at power and distribution and panels, how old are the panels, are they past their useful life, and things like lighting, condition of lighting, is it high efficiency or not. So trying to observe and note those items and just be able to plan for when there need to be money spent on them.
All right, before we I promise we'll get to the bones of this, but I think it's really important to set this up and make sure that you understand how we go about these assessments. Many of us within the industry have a scoring system, so any type of an improvement we find, we think it's wise to give it a score. Why is it important to give it a score? So it's something tangible, so that you as an owner or a community member can come back and say, I'm not sure I agree with the way you scored that, and there's something we can break down to come to a final decision. Otherwise, if it was just an opinion, sometimes it's not as easy to do that. I came up with this years ago, and we're dealing with children, and so safety always has to rise to the top. And so when you're looking at those factors of 3, 2, and 1 for safety, function, aesthetics, any improvement item we find, we give it what's called an importance factor. So 1 through 10, 10 being the highest need, and we multiply it by 3 to get that safety score. And you do the same all the way across with the factor of 2 and 1 to come up with an improvement score. So I just wanted you to be aware of, when we show you these scores, how we got there, okay? Wanted to make a couple of general comments about the lifespan of a building. I don't think there's anything more difficult. I've spent my whole career working with multi-facility owners, and wow, what a tall task you have of trying to keep up with them. But when we are trying to look at the lifespan of a building, it's not just the existing condition like we're going to show you this evening, or the report card, if you will. It's many other things. it's comparisons of costs, whether it's something new versus renovation. It's, are we supporting the curriculum needs through these facilities? Is the building energy efficient? I'll skip embodied carbon because it's so hard to explain, but it really just talks about the sustainability of buildings and how today that's at our forefront, and years ago we didn't think about it at all. Obviously the age of facilities here were front and center for us, okay? When you consider that the average age of a school building in this country in '24 was 49 years old, and you start considering that you have one that doubles that and one that's, nearly 80 years old, we knew we were in for a battle here, right, of things that we were going to find. And we never go into it negatively, but we certainly, those pieces of information are important to us. All right. The order of go, we're going to start with Moccasin, and if I move away from this and you can't hear me, I like to move around a little bit, so I'm sorry. Life safety, just, we touched on some of these things, but I think the visuals help. Let's start up, I don't know if this pointer works, but we're going to see. Upper left-hand corner, you'll see a door. It's kind of in this cavernous, there's no space, you can barely get back there. That's an example of a life safety code issue that we would be looking at. And also door closers and things that make it life safety code. So that's an example of that. The reason we're showing that moccasin sign there is that that didn't meet the life safety code for a fire separation. And some of those doors are actually showing that in today's code, like the lower left would be a fire-rated door that would close automatically, and more than likely you wouldn't have that much glass in today's world because of the cost of fire glass, okay, that would be required. Now, there are hundreds of slides in each one of these facilities. We're only going to give you a taste of what we do, okay? So oftentimes we diagram things. Every one of your facilities has been coned by us, documented by us, and now you have floor plans by us that we can use for future projects. We'll go much further, right, than these diagrams at some point, but the diagrams help us document. So this is really just trying to show the means of egress and the exit path, if you will, through the building. And, we have 2 floors here, small basement. And one of the first things we do, I promise, that we look at codes, right? And we try to determine what the allowable area that's allowed with this particular facility and whether we're over that requirement. You can see there that and I'm sorry if some of this is small, but you see in the last line 14,500 square feet, and the actual is 35,751. So then we have to start looking at, well, is there ways for us to grow the allowable area, and that came out in this study as well. One of those ways is we can take the perimeter of the building, and if we have firefighting access around that building, then we are allowed to add to the allowable area. So that's one example. Fire suppression. No one ever wants to talk about those bad words, but sometimes, and we found it within your district, that if you were ever to do significant work, we may be looking at fire suppression in some of these facilities. A little scary in the cost, right? You can see that it's, what, $300,000 and some $1,000, and it's not just about what has to go in the building, but you got to make sure you got enough infrastructure to feed it. And so one of the things we identified here was that we would be looking at having to do that if you were to improve this facility called Moccasin in a great way. Oh, notice that at the bottom of the sheet, right, now you're starting to see our scoring system. And as promised, there's the improvement factor of 9 in this particular one where we're talking about corridors, and I won't bore you with the rest of it, it's just the math. But the red is showing our corridors. One thing that we learned here is that we did not have that proper fire rating at the corridor. Did we expect it? Of course we did. You know, a facility this old, we definitely expected to find that. Doors, so within that corridor, we had all these doors that need to be rated. They have to be a minimum of 20-minute rating. And, you know, in this particular case, you know, none of the doors met that. And you can see some of these start to, the highest score, by the way, is 60, so you can see the importance of some of these. And I would say that, you know, when you look at this entire study, accessibility and life safety, you're going to see most of those numbers high, right? Because in our world, we're protecting the kids. You know, I get frustrated with our government at the state level because I've done this my whole career, and we'll grandfather things as important as life safety. Now, I get why we do it, because we can't afford to always upgrade these things. But I've begged them for years to start chipping away at this, right? So we can continue to improve them little by little to make it safer for kids. Stairways, in this particular building, these would need to be enclosed stairways in today's code. That was that fire separation wall that I mentioned earlier. Means of egress or distance out of a building comes into play, and we always have to make sure that we're adhering to that. Kitchen needing fire suppression. Oftentimes you play the card of getting the fire suppression in a kitchen and not having to do the whole building, but in this particular case, if you were to do it, we'd probably be looking at the whole building. Emergency lighting, where they're occurring, are they operational? Some of this is quite difficult for us to figure out in a high-level study like this, and but we know that there are some issues there. Fire extinguishers, distance between them, and whether we think we need to add fire extinguishers. So when you start to look at just life safety alone, you can see the numbers here, and what we're as high as, 53. But all of these numbers should be in that category as far as I'm concerned. If I was to stop right now and say, of these 4 facilities, major facilities we've studied, which one am I probably the most concerned about, it would be this facility, mainly because of the age group, right? And we'll do our best to keep going here and keep this thing moving. So accessibility, we got, I promised you that, like the door in the lower right, you have to have a certain amount of clearance on the latch side of the door to meet accessibility. So very common in these older facilities, it just wasn't a thing then, right? Well, now we pay a lot of attention to wheelchairs and people being able to navigate that struggle. Other things, upper left, you can see that what we're always expecting to see from transition of concrete to asphalt is that tactile warning system. And because if someone is having trouble seeing or hearing and they step in front of a car, that we want that warning for those people as well. Just a couple of items. We know, right, with Moccasin, I think you all have talked about an elevator for quite some time, so that's a major item here with the stairways. Just real quick, not much cost there about correcting the amount of parking and where it occurs. Building access, we identified all those to make sure that we could identify everything that's going to need a ramp or an improved ramp or tactile detection. Access for auto doors. This is always a big argument with code officials, owners as far as schools, design professionals. The way I look at it is that if you're looking at a major access point, you know, oftentimes you'll hear building officials say, well, it's only the front door, you know. Well, why would that be any different than a major sporting event and you've got a major access point there? we looked at these as needing them at each one of those major corridor access points. I think we've touched on that. Restrooms, always a problem with older buildings. Sorry. So anytime you have a community restroom and you have these multiple stalls, you have the problem of one of them needs to be accessible. It's bigger. We've all been in them, right? And so we have trouble with that. We have access problems or clear space problems once we get inside the restroom, and even the latch side of the door. I mean, so many problems of trying to get properly to these restrooms. Floor sinks, things we don't even think about. We always think about the restrooms first, but don't think about the sinks that the students are using within a room, and that they need the access, and their legs need to be going underneath it in case they are in a wheelchair. So all of those things come out in these type of studies. Code now tells us we have to have a low-high drinking fountain system with a filling station. I always think it's funny they keep adding things, but the filling station is a great thing that came along mainly because of your world, the filters and everything that come with it and keep us safer. Signage, of course, we want to make sure that this meets accessible means throughout the facility. And then the elevator, and Trish, I think you know that we've talked about, you know, some of those costs and where it might want to go, but you can see that asterisk at the left-hand side. It would be nice to, if it was added, to be close to a circulation path and a stair, and but obviously not cheap, right? To make something like that happen. You got to think about it's not just that elevator, it's that masonry enclosure, and it's the control room that operates it, and all those things that go along with it. So you can see here, big numbers again. Probably a good time to stop and say, I've never seen a district in my 35 years accomplish 30%, anything up to 30%, never higher from these studies. It's impossible. Right? At the end of the day, it's impossible. So I don't want you to get all depressed because of these big numbers. Why do we do it? You educate children. We're educating you about the magnitude of this, and we don't ever expect that this all would be tackled. We hope at the end of the study it gives you insight into good decisions moving forward, a roadmap of what to tackle first, you know, versus 10th. Okay? All right, sir.
Okay, so from an MEP standpoint for Moccasin, this one's kind of simple. Where like more or less all of the MEP is past its useful life. You'll see you've got some pictures here. You know, like on the far to the right, you got a fan in the basement. Does most of the ventilation. We've just got old heating systems that are past their useful life. We've got window air conditioners doing most of the cooling. You mentioned fire suppression in the kitchen, but there needs to be a kitchen hood first, really, to have fire suppression. So, like, we're missing the kitchen hoods, things like that, would be important adds. So I'm not going to go too deep, but I'm happy to answer questions as time goes on, too. But we kind of got a summary of, describing what the existing systems are for heating, your air handlers, terminal units, ventilation. Another big item you'll see across the schools is controls. And that's something staff has noted too, is that there's a bit of a mishmash of control systems. There's not a lot of, in this building has pneumatic controls. There's not a lot of availability to schedule equipment, maintain temperatures, be efficient with its operation. And so like in this case, we're recommending, it needs a new HVAC system for the building. So that's just the general recommendation. So we've got costs, and what that system looks like really requires a little bit of study and feasibility and analysis to be like, there's multiple ways you could do it for heating and cooling. More pictures. From a plumbing standpoint, there's, given the building's age, this is one where we'd recommend like your domestic water piping is galvanized. It's probably corroded a lot. It's going to be time to consider new piping that's more accessible and copper and is sort of a safety element. And then just some old equipment, water heaters and adding water softeners. There's hard water here. You mentioned fire suppression already. A few pictures of the components in there. We've got old, bathroom groups. Fixtures, we sort of just say fixtures, these are pretty old, but when you renovate the bathroom, you probably want new fixtures, so. And then electrically, it's more of the same. It's pretty old service and main panels. The distribution panels are past their useful life. Feeders and wiring should be evaluated to make sure it's still in acceptable condition. Lighting is a bit of a mixture, mostly for fluorescence, some LED bulbs. Don't have a whole lot of lighting controls going on, so there's a lot of efficiency upgrades possible there with LED lights and controls that would certainly help. Fire alarm is also one we'll see pretty consistently across the buildings, where we've got some fire alarm systems that are, medium age, need to be considered in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's also something that code's also changing a lot, where, as you touch spaces and have to renovate, there needs to be a voice evac, the ones that talk to you and tell you to get out of the building, and some of those upgrades that devices would require. So we've included some of those elements in. And this one specifically, smoke detectors is another one that, there's some areas that aren't as covered for smoke detection. I think that's some pictures. We looked at low voltage, some of the low voltage tech systems as well, just to kind of capture some of those conditions. You can see sort of on the right there, an old fused panel board. That's not something you see a whole lot anymore. And then we're following a sort of scoring analysis here, so we're kind of doing that same metrics that we'll be able to compare across the buildings to sort of score on safety, function, and aesthetics. So yeah, in summary, MEP is a big number here. There's a lot of systems involved, and I would say that these are conceptual numbers, right, that we're thinking about. Like, you need to do a whole new system. When you get into the real design, those things take more form and shape and granularity.
So, I belong to the visual world, right? Being an architect, so these things help me, and I hope it helps you, because at the end of the day, I kind of glaze over when I'm seeing just line upon line of numbers and pieces of information. I mentioned that we were just going to kind of touch on the site and envelope this evening, and I gave you a flavor of what kind of things those would include. But I think that this kind of sums it up of how to divide up the money, or the improvements that we found. I think it's going to be best. It'll get faster, I promise, as we go through these, because we'll start to gain momentum. But is there questions? Maybe this is a good time to stop and see if there are questions that you might be interested in asking, and we'll do our best to answer. Yes?
Have you got any numbers on a brand new facility?
You're spoiling my show. Yes, I do. At the end, I will talk to you about that, because Trish has already heard me talk about this. Whenever we collect this information and we get somewhere between 50 and, I'll just say 50 to 70% of a new building, flag goes up. And so, yes, I will share that at the end.
I have one more question. Is it worth you guys looking at some inflationary factors too when you're doing this? Because your cost today with facility planning and financing is not the cost 2 years from now, and anything's likely to happen. So is that something you guys can think about as you're working through this?
Yes, and the only way I've known that it's been successful to do that over the years is to talk the district into letting it be a living document. Do not set it on a shelf. It needs to be touched every year, and you start looking at that. Otherwise, I've just not come up with a good enough formula, right? But great point, great point. Other questions? Yes?
I got a question. You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but just to use an example. So when you throw a line item up there, like elevator, $500,000, like just this flat number is that, where does that number come from, and how accurate is it to say what 2 or 3 elevator companies would bid to put that in? Like, where does that number come from, I guess?
So I can guarantee that my numbers, our numbers in a study are always going to be conservative, right? Inflation, but to answer where the number comes from, for us as a company, our numbers come from contractors, as opposed to just dreaming these numbers up. When Trish asked for the number for this, can't remember, it was a while back, we visited with Pearson Construction and E&L Construction, actually going to the sources that actually have good experience, recent experience of putting these in. Are there contingencies built into these numbers? You bet. I think that if we're doing a service, a good service for you, we got to make sure that these numbers are safe for a little bit of time down the road, and for the unknowns. I mean, if we start putting in an elevator at Moccasin, for example, there is going to be a host of skeletons in the closet and things we're not thinking about standing here at 30,000 feet looking at that. I hope, did that help?
I think so.
Okay, yep.
I think you're trying to include an appropriate amount of unknowns when like you don't have a design solution complete, but you're trying to estimate, a whole new system based on our experience, based on, we're continually seeing bids on other projects to see what they come in at, so we're constantly getting that information.
I just didn't know how specific to that actual building and space and number of floors, for example, in that case. The fire suppression one being a high number, for example, is that based on, just are these things based on previous elementary schools of similar, whether it's ceiling space for the sprinklers or a 2-floor building for the elevator versus an elementary school with 4 floors and putting an elevator in, those types of things? I was just like, how much detail comparison goes into, say, coming up with that number?
We're looking at square footage numbers for that. Then we have to think about the infrastructure. Is there enough water coming into the building to even handle it? So then you're putting money in there to handle that as well. But yeah, I mean, I think, I would like to think that these are very educated guesstimates of numbers, especially, we are doing a lot of schoolwork, and that historical data is everything, right? It's something you can go back and cross-check. Anything else? We'll move on. Okay. I'm sorry. Yes.
So a quick question, when you look at communities and do these assessments, do you look at viable options which may be maybe empty structures that would cost less to retrofit and meet the needs of the district?
It's not something that's part of the study, but we do that all the time.
So we sold a school that is currently up for sale. Is it cost effective to repurchase that school on a property, retrofit that, and maybe it's another building?
I think that always should be options that you consider. I just would caution you of not going from one problem to another problem that has not been studied, right? We may think on the surface it seems like a great idea, but by all means, I think that's an important step to take. I mean, vacant buildings, how long have they been vacant? How long have the systems been abandoned? All those things would come into play. Okay?
Some of these numbers are in line with other communities,
Yes.
historical data and what's coming into now.
Yes.
This is not a sticker shock moment when you see this number, because it kind of is for me.
Sure. Well, but I want to be completely honest. I mean, I went into this project knowing you had 2 very old buildings, and so I prepared myself, okay? And if I compare this 4-facility study to the last one we did, it even surprised me, okay? But you have to give in to the fact that these older facilities are going to create challenges like maybe no other, right? But I think once you get past the age and you start to get in the pocket of these studies, yes, I think it's very comparable to what we find across the board.
I would say in this example from mechanical, I'm looking at this like it's a pricing HVAC, like it's a new building, because you're basically going to do a whole new system. And I'd say that's in the range of what you would see on like a new construction elementary school.
Ottawa, I think that anytime we show these first images, just start to pay attention to the number of windows, the number of wall square footage, the square footage of the roof, just as a snapshot of what happens with the envelope, and we can dig into that deeper next time. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but the same type of things occur throughout the facilities. But, you know, if you look at these 4 facilities, Moccasin and the high school were the ones we really had a lot to share. Ottawa and the middle school were the shining stars, right? So, and you always want them when you're studying a comprehensive analysis. Same type of things, your pathways and exit passageways through the building. Again, square footage, allowable area. Again, we're exceeding it, and then the first thing we do is say, how can we add to the allowable area? This was an interesting study at this particular facility where we do believe that there was an opportunity. We got excited that if we considered the allowable area increase of firefighters getting around the facility, that we'd pass it. Well, there's a very scientific formula we have to use, and we failed. Fire suppression, another big number, right? If we were to solve the allowable area, this might be one of the few ways to do it. Other ways that you can do it is fire separation walls, but many, if not all, with the exception of Moccasin, all of your facilities had fire separation walls in it, but it didn't compartmentalize it enough to meet code today. Corridors, again, ratings, notice that the red lines don't go into the new section of the building. Kind of what we expected to see, that everything's fire rated over there, but not in the old. Means of egress, this is one I pay a lot of attention to, because just because you have an operable window as a second means of egress out of a classroom doesn't mean that it works. So we often talk about nothing more than maintenance and making sure that they work, and having somebody sign off to say they do, and replace a part if it's needed. But we run into this so many times that it's scary. Means of egress, we can't allow you to passageway through an intervening space, and some of that came up in some of these older facilities. Excuse me, the doors, again, having to have that fire rating. You can see how it's populated, right? And all that red is no rating, and you get over to the newer section of the building are much better shape. Kitchen, exit, emergency lighting. You start feeling really good about a $3,000 cost, or even better, a zero, with fire extinguishers. See the summary of costs for life safety. Accessibility, some of the same things. Lower left is a great example of a sink that's not necessarily accessible. I always worry about facilities that have an age, a lower age, and then you're talking about, well, how do I make the wheelchair work versus not, and because it's so low already. So, but they still have to meet certain criteria.
Is that the humidifier dripping down into the sink?
Um,
Is that pipe? Is that what that is?
Every classroom.
Every classroom, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, sorry, just.
No, that's good.
The dehumidifier.
D humidifier, thank you.
So the parking, again, the access into the building, auto doors, doors themselves, again, about that latch side on the older side of the building, we were seeing some of those conditions. You might know that accessibility also requires lever handles, and so we kind of studied that where we needed to, in case a door wasn't totally replaced, we could at least make it accessible with a new piece of hardware, if you will. Restrooms, as you would expect, everything's to code on the left-hand side of the new, and everything on the right-hand side did not meet, but there are some shining stars. Like anytime we get a little bit of grace in if we give enough community accessible spaces, then they give us a little latitude over here on something that might be considered more private within a room. So we tried to pay attention to those and give you those when we could. More about the sinks and drinking fountains, signage, and the summary here. I get excited, right, when I'm seeing these bigger numbers and I see this number. It's very refreshing.
Jump to the table here. So yeah, this is certainly a more, where's my summary here? Do I have- Here we go. We're in a lot better condition at Ottawa here. We've got newer boilers that were just installed, so new heating system. We've got a couple old air handlers that serve the library space and the gym. So that's an item we identify as like, that's an element that hasn't been touched in a long time as an upgrade. Obviously the 2014 edition is in good shape. No real recommendations associated with that. I think your classrooms have new vertical unit vents that are installed last year, even 2 years, year and a half ago. So there's not a whole lot of needs there. I think we have just a little bit of recommendation for the administration area because that doesn't really have a permanent cooling solution. But you'll see, yeah, the MEP mechanical summary for the school is pretty light. New boilers, nice ventilation system on the addition, the old gym air handler on the right. There's the old air handler serves the library. So a couple remaining items, but most of the systems have been upgraded. Plumbing is similar. We didn't really have any new recommendations. I think we had a water softener here. We've got newer water heaters. Domestic piping looks new and in good condition. So no big recommendations with that. And then electrical, we have some of the same items here where we're recommending like lighting. LED lighting upgrades are usually a good idea. So it's not something you have to do, but it's a recommendation to consider. Panel boards, I think there's some panel boards that are a little bit out of date and could be upgraded on the electrical distribution side. And then fire alarms, similar fire alarm elements here where there's some devices that are a little bit older and could be upgraded. I think the summary was up in the front. Let me go up there a second. So a little bit more on the electrical side here, but some of those are also elective. When we talk about like this is the biggest items you can have, like this is, I always call it like the menu. This is like the giant menu of options, and you don't have to do all of them, right? So we kind of like to give some recommendations, and at least give you some idea of what that would cost. I think that's okay again. Okay. Your turn.
Okay, we're halfway through. I do want to go back and just remind everyone that, yes, we don't ever expect to walk into a situation like this and try to make recommendations for improvements and think we're going to solve everything. I'm sorry. But I do want to go back to that list I gave you in the beginning to get you thinking about it again. How healthy is the building, right, for the students? And that's why Nate's information's so important. And quite honestly, people like Mark are going to be concerned about the operation of that building and how expensive is it to operate that facility versus others. So many things to think about. Our graphic, we'll move on. Middle school, all I'm going to say here is when you start to see, you have some multi-story or two-story buildings, right? And then when you spread it all out, then you have more roofs. So it's always this game you play about that game of square footage, but a lot of roof there. Life safety, again showing the doors and particular egress paths. As you would guess, here again, this is a bigger building, and so we started looking for how it was compartmentalized. Right there tells you how this building is currently compartmentalized. And if you look at the numbers on the left-hand side, you see the ones that are above the 14.5. So we started studying the allowable area again to see if we could increase it. And what did I say there? It failed again. And so one option would be if you know, significant work was done here, maybe that fire suppression is considered again. Again, reminding you that you're all grandfathered until the whole purpose of this, right, is to get to a point where improvements can be made. All in all, this facility much better, right, as far as its age, many things much more conforming with code. Every once in a while, we'll find a travel distance that doesn't make sense, that we're required by code to not exceed. And so here was a case where we would solve that by adding another exit. Courtyards are my nemesis. I mean, oftentimes you empty students into a courtyard and then not have the panic devices and the proper way to get them out of. So I'm always paying a lot of attention to courtyards and how they should be handled. This is such a great story, right? Remember the other slides of how many asterisks you saw for the doors? That's a good story there. That's even a better story. 0. Fire extinguishers, great number. Now, if you're thinking that this number is not as attractive as it should be, let's not forget of how big it is, because that number is going to be spread out over that square footage. Accessibility, whether we're finding stairs without ramps, or this is kind of an interesting building, because if I'm not mistaken, is this the one that was an open concept? Yeah. You can almost pick them out when you walk through, because that was really big in the 70s. It was having these stairs everywhere. And then along came accessibility. Again, parking was good here. Building access, not anything terrible. Auto doors where we thought needed to be added. It's not that you didn't have them at all, but I think there would be a good argument if you did a major improvement that we should be adding more. Restrooms, again, I think what we learned here is that better than the older schools, but still had some antiquated, old enough restrooms that needed some attention for accessibility. This is something, when I talk about these sinks within classrooms and that students would use, has become something from a building official side that they really have clamped down on us now. They used to give us a lot more opportunities where the wheelchair could be a side access instead of under, and so it's becoming much more complicated now. Seems like a crazy number, but to solve stairs that need a ramp and how to do it and structurally what has to change to make it work is sometimes daunting. Drinking fountains, signage. I don't know about you, but that looks really good.
So I might even just stay on the MEP summary for this one, because there is, it's pretty up to date with systems here. Mechanical, the only recommendation we really have was controls. I think just from a standpoint of getting all the buildings connected together, this has a Siemens control system. It's fine, but it's not connected to any central system that the facility staff can access at one time. So that's just money to sort of include that integration. Plumbing was good. I think electrically, lighting, again, sort of just a recommendation to upgrade to LED fixtures. So it's just old lighting in the building. But otherwise, the condition's not the problem. And then fire alarm, some recommendations for fire alarm to replace devices with new digital devices that meet the current code. Again, some of that's grandfathered, some of that would get affected by renovation, but that's a recommendation to kind of capture that scope. Let's see. mostly what's already in these tables. See some of the power, summary of the scoring. I think that's there again, so. This was the easy one.
One more.
We didn't take questions last time.
We didn't, well, we can always stop. If you have questions, I'm sorry that. Go back? That one? Okay. You like the graphics too, huh, Mark? I think this is a good time to applaud this district. These are not easy steps to take, right? To dive this deep and look at potentially the issues that you have to take care of. But if you don't do it, can you imagine if you don't do it? You're constantly, the worst thing that can happen is you do things out of order and things cost you more money because they're out of order. So how important is a study like this to get the magnitude, but the order of go it's very important. Okay, we'll zip through one more here. The high school. If I could make one positive comment here about the high school would be fire suppression, right? I'm not sure how it evolved over time and how it ended up here, but that was you won't believe it with the numbers, but it does make quite a difference here. Again, pathways and I remember when I walked this facility the first time, some facilities just are really easy, right? And you don't need to drop breadcrumbs or anything. And others, you're not sure where you're at, right? I felt a little bit like that, but then we became pretty familiar with, you need to know that there's some ancillary type spaces, to this building with the art building and the CTE space. Those become much simpler of getting people out of the building, but nonetheless, we wanted to study that as well, the second floor. And then the basement. When you think about your elevator that you do have, it does not make it to the lowest floor, so that created us some questions about, well, what do we do to solve that? Code analysis here was, it was very difficult. The only thing that really helped us here was that fire suppression system, because you get to increase that allowable area to a point where it makes a lot more sense. I wanted to point out that you do have some fire separations, and one of those other ways to break the building up into allowable area components. We also studied the increase of allowable area here. Corridors. Again, what we would expect with this age of facility, there might be some segments of it, but much of it is not meeting how it terminates and how it is sealed. And again, with or without the fire suppression system, the stairways, at least some of them, at least 50% of them would have to be consideration for being enclosed. Means of egress, again, I think that, again, I'm more concerned about, are they operating? First of all, do you have them, but then are they operating properly? Here's a distance of travel where we can't make the distances work, and we're saying you should add another stair if there was a major improvement project here. I'm not sure I've ever seen this, but with the way you empty out of the building and you have a fenced-in area, we even studied that because we were concerned that, when we think about in an emergency to get it far enough away from the building if it was burning, what kind of panic devices have to be on the fence systems to get you out. Now, we all can say that there's an operational side to this and no one's in the building, but we all know that something bad could happen and not even know. Now you start to understand the rating problems within a facility of this magnitude. Kitchen again. emergency lighting. Again, I applaud the district for, you keep your buildings up pretty well for their age, right? And so we're happy to see, I guess, the lowest hanging fruit of life safety. You guys are paying a lot of attention to, and that's good. Stage curtains, we even go as far as to figure in a new structure, you would either have fire suppression at the stage level or at least fire retardant curtains. Same accessibility type things occurring here. Parking, again, we just didn't see, it looks like you have enough accessible spaces where they need to be. Building access, definitely some issues here about making sure that we have safe access points to the building. The auto doors come back up. A couple of different locations here. It's a big building and you have different events happening, and just a very strong professional opinion that you probably need more of those. Elevator. When we study the elevator you have, I think that if you're going to put money into it, we probably should be looking at ways to solve the whole puzzle and do it the right way. And the beautiful part of it is it's in a location where we could connect the bottom floor. So that would be something we would want to study further at some point. Again, broken record, but you can see these narrow access points with no latch side accessible space to navigate. Lever handles, restrooms, sinks, and every once in a while we'll see a ramp or a stair, and we need to study it a little bit to see if any improvements needed. I like to show zeros too. I mean, you know, you deserve to see the zeros, and so when you get this full report, because I think the full report is every bit as important as presenting this brief version of it, because in 5 years you can go back and look at a photo and see the door number and say, did it deteriorate? Did it get any worse? Did the masonry get any worse? You know, those will be good pieces of information to have. Drinking fountains, signage, and oftentimes we struggle with spaces like this, but I think all in all, okay, so one more time, sir.
So the high school has a lot more vintages of systems, so we'll spend a little more time on, because some, varying ages, right? So you'll see some pictures here of classroom unit events, cooling that's already been added to the second level of the high school. So that's, progress that's been made there. All the pumps that are part of the heating plant, and then some different pictures of sort of air handlers and rooftops, kind of representing those different systems. So just from a heating system standpoint, we've got 2 pretty big hot water boilers that serve most of the building from 1993. They're, as far as we know, working fine. They're probably about at their useful life, so something that you would want to plan for replacing in the near term. So that's a recommendation we've included. Air handling units that do most of the air supply to a lot of the areas of the building. We've got a bunch of different vintages, so some newer ones that were on the addition. Several units from 1993 that are in pretty good condition because they're inside. They can last quite a long time. And then some older ones that are, 60s, 70s, 80s vintage. Competition gym obviously was something that's been brought up as an area that has a very old system in the basement, doesn't have cooling. So those replacements of some of those failed systems, the cooling for the band area. So we've included recommendations for the replacements of those systems, a new rooftop for that competition gym, and then just kind of that suggestion of the 93 units are okay for now, but you should plan for them in the next 5 to 10 years. Kitchen, HVAC, I think the kitchen itself is in good shape, but the culinary program has a commercial type classroom that doesn't really have any ventilation to support that. The art building mostly was in good condition. I think it doesn't have cooling everywhere, so that's a consideration. shop building has sufficient systems for makeup and ventilation, just no cooling. There's a couple different styles of rooftop units. A couple are pretty old, so we included recommending replacing those. And then terminal units is a big one. Those are your unit ventilators in the classroom. I think all of the unit ventilators are around 1993, and they've got issues with controls not working and dampers failing and probably not maintaining temperature and some of those challenges. So the recommendation is to replace those unit vents with new ones of a similar style, and then continue with adding cooling in a similar manner to the remaining classrooms. And then we kind of touch on ventilation. Ventilation, when you do new unit ventilators for your classrooms, will help actually make sure you get new test and balance, get enough fresh air into the rooms. We usually recommend CO2 sensors for that demand control, so that's measuring your classroom air and making sure you have enough fresh air all the time. And then controls is a big item. So I think the controls at this building is a bit mixed. We've got some Siemens, we've got some older systems. So again, kind of across the district, a recommendation to kind of get on one platform that's, you can access on your computer and control easily. Pictures of the boiler plants and pumps, and newer, condensing unit cooling systems in the classroom, an older rooftop. The different air handler for this room upstairs, that kitchen, and then some of the newer air handlers. So plumbing, we didn't note any significant challenges. Domestic water side, nobody noted any problems with leaks. Water heaters are pretty new, or very new. There's new water softeners, so no known challenges there or recommendations. Again, new water heaters, got the water softeners. Then electrical, it's mostly the same items again, so lighting upgrades being recommended. The cost is just going up because there's more square footage. Same for the fire alarm. We've got some older fire alarm devices. Again, it's something to consider where you're renovating and or in the future when that system's kind of gets beyond its useful life. Scores, summary. So yeah, here it's mostly mechanical and those variety of, addition of cooling unit vents and controls. That's kind of driving that MEP number.
I wanted to kind of land here a minute to answer a question that came up a little earlier. And I always, before I give you a range of dollar per square foot for new construction, I always have to tell you a story. In 2022, at the beginning of that year, we were seeing $250 a square foot for many things. And by the time we got to the end of that year, it was 500. And so we all know what happened. We had COVID hit, and a lot of things had trouble getting back to what was common. And it never goes back to common, you realize, right? It ratchets down somewhere in the midst of the middle. But I share that because I'm using square footage costs of $350 to $450 a square foot for the high school, and an elementary cost of $315 to $415 a square foot. Now you might want to ask, well, why such a spread? It could have everything to do with site development. It could have to do one or two story. I could go on and on with all but we want to make sure at this level that we have a big enough range. So you're looking at high school wise for the square footage you have is 45 to 58 million. And elementary would be in that 11 to 15 million for the size of Moccasin, right? And you might remember me talking about the red flag goes up when you start to get at the halfway point. So if you start looking at these numbers like the high school, you're right on that, you're right on the brink, right?
45, sorry. about rebuild?
Yes, for
Okay.
rebuild costs. I'm sorry,
No, you're fine.
I was going back to answering his question, I'm
No,
sorry.
you're fine.
But yeah, I thought it was important that you see that. I'm not suggesting anything this evening, but I do think that when we are dealt with older facilities and they're this old, it has to be a discussion point. We think it should be a discussion point. Never popular, but I think it would be a good discussion to have in moving the district forward with making decisions on future improvements. Okay. Other things that come along with this study, you'll get all the photos and everything, and they're so hard to, right? There's so many of them, and electronically, thank goodness we finally went digital because we can more efficiently give you all of this data. I will say again, Trish, you'll guide me on next week what you want done there. I don't think I'm gonna have my son got injured really bad, and so he won't be here, but, so if we need to dive deep on envelope and site, we can do that. It'd be more of the same type of things, right? Each one of our slides show an evidence, what'd we find, right? The solution, the cost, and the score. But I wanted to give you a glimpse of what that site and envelope infused into the project would look like so you could have a total cost for everything. Questions?
I just had one about the high school. There's nowhere to grow here,
Yes,
correct?
right.
You talked about that at Moccasin and showed the space.
Right.
So nothing here, right? You didn't find any?
No, I mean, it's, yeah, you got two examples of it with two facilities that are pretty tough for what do you do, right?
Yeah.
And then we often say, well, you can always go up, right? Well, it gets even more complicated with a 100-year-old building and what was it designed to do? And yes, we built differently back then and very robust, but still a structural process to figure out how to get there. Yes?
Can you repeat those build from your numbers again real quick?
Sure. So I'm using $350 to $450 a square foot for the high school and $315 to $415 for the elementary. Okay. Where do we come up with those? Recent projects. I mean, even after you've been in it 35 years, I don't believe, I can't even believe the numbers myself, right? But that's where we're at. And will it correct itself? You bet it will.
What was the total though?
Totals were, for the high school, 45 to 58 million with that range of cost, and 11 to 15 for the same square footage if it was Moccasin. And would you build the same square footages for Moccasin especially? Probably not. Probably gonna be a little bigger. We want it to be bigger because you're gonna grow. Yes.
What kind of process has been discussed about prioritizing all the different things in these proposals as far as high priority and priority, low priority?
Well, we start with the scores, okay? That's where we'll start with you. But we've worked with districts before, and Nate doesn't want to hear this, but we've worked with districts. This is the starting point, right? And then you'll find a smaller group that wants to dig deeper, and we help you prioritize each school. But we start with the scores. That's why we start with the scores, and then we ask ourselves which is grandfathered and which is not. Well, we know that now. We know life safety is until you start building or substantially building.
Is it fair what he's asking is kind of the next step?
It is.
What you take and do with this.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, because some of the things are gonna come up, I mean, obviously, if we put a bond out for, you said it was 40 something to 58 million just for this school.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a hard thing to do.
Sure.
So whether it's a bond or whether it's a, we look at trying to pick off some of these items,
That's right.
right? Some of these, even after they're scored, when we look at objectively from the teams that are here and say, okay, well, this is something that is conceivable and this is what's not, we have to start planning for that and have to keep the plan on it.
You're still gonna need help prioritizing it beyond this, right? And the best way I've found that it works is we may step into the mechanical world, or the electrical world, or the life safety world, and then just hone in on that. And say, okay, here's my top 10. Next, and you find your way through. But this step has to happen first, so you can kind of work backwards. Sounds strange, but you almost have to get the full projection first. Yes.
I know that those numbers, you explained what those, like, for example, new build numbers, does that include, say, furniture in the classroom, things like that, or is that just the structure?
Great question. So I would say that the range of costs that I'm building into this, yes, you're going to have what I call some FF&E in there, furniture, furnishings, equipment. Will it be every loose piece of furniture? Probably not. But I try to give that range for that purpose too, right? Well, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules and asking good questions. And I'm not sure, Trish, I don't know if I've ever presented to this bigger group. So, kudos.
I appreciate it.
You were $415 or $450 a square foot to build new, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, a
Maybe
350.
I didn't understand you really well.
Yeah, 350 to 450 for the high school.
Yeah, but you didn't give us, okay, if we wanted to rebuild Moccasin, is there a solid number as to how much it would cost us to just build Moccasin?
What I did, sir, is I took the square footage of Moccasin, and then I applied it to 315 to 415 a square foot, and it ended up being 11 to 14 million.
So if you added Ottawa to that, since we have 2 elementary schools, would that, you know, you've got, what, $17 million up there for the 2 elementary schools?
Right.
Well, as long as we're doing it, we're asking for the amount of money you're gonna have to ask for. Why can't we just do away with the 2 elementary schools?
I think it's a marvelous thought that should be at the table. I think when you start to move beyond this study, and whatever that means, whatever the trajectory is, all of that should be at the table being discussed, yes.
And I think it's important to talk about the scope that we've asked for from the study. So the study is the study of our current facilities,
Correct.
not so much of what are our options beyond this. So from here, we take this information and start determining what those next steps are.
Thank you. One thing I was supposed to say early is oftentimes we come to a district, Trish knows this, and I say, we believe in doing feasibility and existing condition at the same time. Sometimes you just can't. So we started with the existing condition, but eventually you're going to find yourself to feasibility, right? And that's exactly what you're speaking of, sir. Would it be a new build or additions or renovations? And
Well, it just bothers me about your numbers, because everybody that's done any sort of rehab at all, once you start digging into a 100-year-old building, your numbers struggle.
no, I don't disagree at all. All I know is that I was not shy with my pen with these numbers, because you can't, not with a 80-year-old building, a 100-year-old building. You have to be cautious. Thank you.
Thank you.
So real quick, I would like to say I appreciate everybody that is here tonight, and if you can continue to come and have people join us when we have these conversations. That's the big part. Thank you for being here. So I think the formal steps, this is a work session, so a little bit different. You're seeing the information the same time we're seeing the information, so from here, we look forward to seeing the rest of the information. And then our next steps will be kind of mapping out the plan and assessing what our steps are. We do have public comment on the agenda. I think we kind of had it open for public comment, but if there's anything else, I don't have any cards.
We don't have anything else.
All right. Any additional comments or questions from the board?
No. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you all for coming. I love having the involvement and the ideas, so that'll be helpful as we move on. Our next meeting is April 21st at 6 PM.